Hello, today I'm doing a video I wanted to do for quite a while. This is how to build a cheap ignition system for just about anything. I have used this kind of setup, like I always use different parts because there's just tons of stuff that's basically built the same and it works. I've used this on everything from Maytag washing machine motors to chainsaws, outboards, snowmobiles, dirt bikes, motorcycles, and just anything with an engine that's 2 cylinders or less. You can get away with this. The parts that I'm using today are Chinese. I do like to use Mitsubishi or the Honda CDIs for this when I have them available. Now, like, I don't go to a scrapyard and see an engine without tearing the CDI out of it if it's got one. There's like lots of different ways you can do this, but this is basically the simplest way, and you can do this AC or DC. So where the fuck did I put that? If you have a bike and the CDI is blown, or the I'm going to be doing this, the coil is blown, but the coil. If you look at your stator, this is just cheap Chinese one, and you'll see poles with these big thick wires. These are not what you're going to be running off unless you go DC and you use a rectifier regulator. But if you got one of these coils up top here, or you can also get these on a post, this is an AC stator, and that can run an AC version of the CDI. But we're just going to do the DC, which you don't actually even need a stator or a charging system. You can run a battery and go total loss. Basically, you can put this on anything. I gotta remember how I did the pull-up resistors for last time, so you can actually run this with points instead of a sensor. But this is really simple. Well, we just got it down here. Okay, so the whole idea here is with the sensor here, there's a bunch of different ones like this, probably about 50 of the damn things, and they all work with this. And when it senses a piece of metal is there, it doesn't do anything. But when it senses the metal is gone, it makes a CDI spark. It's that simple. So you can have an aluminum rotor, like a flywheel, and you can stick a magnet to it, which I don't suggest, or what I do suggest is you drill a hole where you need it, you tap in a bolt, and then you cut the top of the bolt off, just leaving a little threaded portion inside of it, and every time that passes, it'll spark. And then, like, there's a bunch of different ones of these. Some have 2 wires, and the very first thing you do if you have 2 wires is you get your multimeter and you find out if one of the 2 wires is grounded to this piece of metal here. Now, these ones like this, the black ones, and they'll have like a piece of metal sticking here, you always want to check if that's magnetic, because if it is magnetic, you can have a magnet or a piece of steel past this and cause it to spark. Yamaha does these differently. They have kind of a flat piece of metal with windings around it, and those ones you have to have a magnet because they're not magnetized themselves. All it does is it senses the breakdown of the magnetic field, and it pulls negative voltage through this from the CDI, and that tells it to spark. I'll hook this up on an oscilloscope later so I can basically show you what's going on with that. So you just take your 1 wire that's not grounded, or if you have 2 wires and neither are grounded, you ground one of them and you run a single wire back to the CDI. That'll be marked on your CDI diagram if you go online as the trigger, pulse, or I don't know, they call it some other things sometimes too. Everything it just gets run single wire like if you're running this AC, and you have this, sometimes you get two wires out of your AC stator coil. You want to check and see which one of those is grounded and just ground it. And then you find the one that's not grounded and you connect that to the power in if you're running AC. The coils, some of these Chinese coils will have the ground will be grounded already. If not, just take that negative wire and hook it up to the ground, and then that's done. So basically one wire from this, one wire from this, and then this, you only need 4 wires. Most of these come with 5 posts or 6 posts. One of them is just for a kill switch. If you're going to run the DC, I don't suggest you use a kill switch. I suggest you actually put a switch to the power to it. Because if you leave this sucker plugged in for a couple hours, it's going to overheat and it's going to blow on you. And that's just a pain in the ass. This particular one right here is adjustable for 25 degrees or advanced or retard. The way I believe this works is the timing is already set advanced from this, and then this retards it 25 degrees is your neutral point, and then you can go back so it's instantly as soon as your piece of metal or magnet passes this to run it, or you can go 50 degrees of retard from it. And yeah, it's fairly simple. These things, if you run DC, and basically any CDI motor, well, maybe 75% of them will have some type of coil or Holster coil or trigger like this. It doesn't matter whether it's Yamaha, whether it's Kawasaki or Suzuki. If you plug the non-grounded line from this in one of these CDIs, it will run off a battery. And then you run your other wire to your coil. I have not seen a coil that one of these AC unit or DC units will not fire, but I have seen a couple coils that the AC units won't fire. Why that is exactly, I don't know, but 99% of these cheap Chinese coils will just work. And it's pretty simple. Like, as soon as the piece of metal or magnet passes that, both those are. Now, here, unplug this. When you do get a coil and you're going to run this system on it, the very first thing you want to test is get out your multimeter. And any one of these that's got metal, like I know this is kind of encapsulated in plastic, but if this post right here, like, you hear the noise, this is supposed to be the ground wire of this coil, and half of them, as soon as you touch it to the post going through the coil, if you don't get a beep or any resistance, that means that you need to ground one of those. But check them both, make sure neither of them are grounded to the post in the coil, and then you'll just take your negative and ground it to there. On some of these units, and they're actually really good ones I've found, you get the little tiny ones that are just circular shape, and they don't have any metal showing, and they just have the 2 posts. Normally one side will be green or black, and you hook that one up to ground, and that'll run your coil. With these right here, there's got to be 50 different types of this, and whether it's one I order from Amazon or whether it's one I find in some old motor, you will always, or half of them have 2 wires, and on Honda, there's always a blue and a green. And the blue is the one you want to hook up to the trigger, and then the green is the one you want to hook up to ground. But if you do have 2 wires, you always just want to test one of the wires and make sure it's not connected to ground. If one is grounded, then just take that wire, cut it short, and put it around here so it's all grounded. And then you just run your single wire back to the trigger on the coil. And Yamaha makes these where they're not magnetic, and they just have a basically a steel sheet like this, and then they have the windings around it. You want to pick up an old hard drive magnet or find a brushless motor like from a drone or something and pull one of those magnets off, and then you can attach that to either a cam or a flywheel or whatever, and as soon as it passes and the magnetic field breaks down, it will fire the... My GoPro keeps shutting down. Okay, so I'm just going to go through how to wire this. If you do buy this yellow box, which is a decent unit, I've used it before, and this has actually got alligator clips because it's my test unit. Whenever if you find most old motorcycles and the stator or the CDI is blown, all you gotta do is hook the wire to your trigger or pulsar coil, which is it's going to be the top left corner if you got the CDI facing up this way. You hook this to your coil, and that is on this one. The trigger always stays the same, but the coil sometimes is over here or sometimes it's one of these corners. You got to kind of be careful and fuck around with them a bit. Never buy just one of these because sometimes you will blow one because they switch around the power source and the coil wires, and it's just a stupid fucking thing to do. So you hook this one to your coil, and then your ground or negative, you got to hook it to a battery, and you got to ground it to your engine. And then your main power wire, you're gonna hook that either to, if you got an AC unit, you're gonna hook it to the AC power from the stator, or if you got a battery unit, you're just gonna connect it to a battery. And don't use a kill switch with a DC unit. You want to put a switch on this wire so you can cut power to it so you don't blow out the capacitor. And there's also a because it converts the DC to AC before it fires your coil, and you the little transformer will blow. So if you're gonna hook this up, just leave that, pause it off for now. Hook that to ground. I got jumper cables running for my grounds for everything right now. So that was ground for these over here. And this is just a ground wire going for my spark plug, and I'm just going to plug that into the negative there. Grab that around there. Doesn't need to be perfect. Now we can hook the coil up, and then hook one of these ground leads to the pulsar coil, hook another ground lead to the coil, which is also to that other ground wire I did. And this is the pulsar coil wire. Just hook that up to the CDI, and now everything's good. Give it power, and you can see those nice bright sparks. Be careful with the DC CDIs, because this unit actually puts out enough power without a coil to have a really short gapped plug spark. Like, there is just stupid power coming out of that. And I know some of you may have hooked yourself up to the with a screwdriver to the spark plug cap on your old chainsaw or lawnmower to see if there's spark the painful way. You do that on this, it fucking hurts. Like, if you have a bad heart and you got this shit running through a fucking coil, you may fuck yourself up, because it's a lot of power. It'll drop you to the fucking floor. If you got a small coil, one of these CDIs, a battery, you could make one fuck of a taser. but we're not doing that because that's illegal up here in Canada. But yeah, that's pretty much it. One other thing is if you're gonna run an AC unit, plug that. I bought this specifically to cut it up. What I'm gonna be doing with this is cutting this coil out, and then I'll be dovetailing this into a burnt out stator for the bike I want, and then I'll be doing my own custom wind. Sorry, I cut out again. I'm going to be dovetailing this stator after I cut it out of this unit here into an old burnt out stator, so I can do my own custom charging wind, because you're going to do a custom 3-phase charging system for the bike this is going into. But I want AC power from this to run a CDI so I can run my bike with no battery. If you ever do that and you want to modify this into your burnt out stator to get something going, like if you're doing something custom like that, you're going to cut this out, you're going to dovetail it in, and when you weld it, you absolutely do not weld a bead down this way. You just tack the corners, because what happens here is if you put connection between these plates in here, they're actually separated for a reason. What that is it's to reduce eddy currents, where you got like basically an electromagnetic field swirling around through a piece of solid bar. That's why on coils and stators you got these flat sheets stacked on top of each other, and they got a fine enamel coating to separate them. So you don't want like any eddy currents in there, so you just tack each corner once you dovetail that in. Yeah, like you never want connection between all these. Like you do want them grounded, like, but you don't want like to make it any more like solid. Yeah, I know that kind of sounds weird, but it does make a difference. And I did learn that one by fucking it up and running a bead through a stator I built, and then it once it got up to a high RPM, it would just start cutting out because I was basically saturating the core and it just couldn't put out enough power. And then when I cut that back out and it welded in another one just the same, except I tacked it just on the corners, I had no problems. Like I'm not like really, like I did spend like 2 years I was locked up researching electronics and stuff because I wanted to be able to build my own CDIs and shit, among other things. And that is kind of one thing that they explain that you don't want to do. And it made sense because from experience it just caused me problems. But it can be done. I've done it way too many times. And when you're looking at something like let me just cut out again. But if you're looking at like an old engine, like especially Mercury and Mariner outboards, like their CDIs are stupid. There's this old Mercury that a guy wanted me to fix. It was worth about $500 to $900 running in good condition. But the CDI was blown, and the CDI cost $450. So I actually used an AC system on that because it did have an AC coil, and we hooked it up for it was a $10 CDI, so I bought 2 of them and taped another one into the doghouse. So somebody, if they had electrical problems, could just plug a new one in. And yeah, $20, saved $450, and we sold the engine. We did explain to the guy that how the electrical was, so he could do it again, and it worked. I did a lot of motors like that too, like an old YZ I had is a mid or early 90s YZ 250, and I used the original stator and pulsar coil, and because it was AC fired, I used one of the blue aluminum Chinese boxes, CDI boxes, AC. You know that one because it's got a picture of the timing curve on the front with a bunch of Chinese letters that I do not understand. But because that one actually had more of a timing curve than most of them do, I got a beautiful fucking power band out of the bike because the whole bottom end was nice and smooth. It wasn't like trying to like. It wasn't too advanced because it didn't give that kind of coggy feeling when you load it up too much and you're in too high of a gear. It just ran really nice. And then once you passed mid range, the fucking timing curve kicks in, and you just got a crazy fucking power band. It basically what I got was something that if somebody who didn't know the engine would ride, as soon as they got up to like halfway through the RPMs, the fucking thing would just take off on them. And I don't know, I like that kind of power. Not a lot of people do, but I think he's kind of being a pain in the ass. But anyways, that's pretty much it. Like, it's pretty simple. Like, you can either run one of these things off of basically a steel cup, and if you have 2 notches in it, cut into it, like Harley Davidson does that. And that's actually what I'm going to be putting a AC version of this onto. Like, as long as you can put a bead of weld or weld a small plate like the Chinese sometimes do onto the outside of a steel flywheel, and then where the metal's close, it'll generate that magnetic field, and then it'll break off after the metal passes. You do it on magnets. You can, if you have an overhead cam engine, in some cases you can make a small hole in the valve cover and stick a smaller version of this into there. So you would then put a spacer onto one of the cam bolts to move the head of the cam bolt out towards this, so you're timing off the cam. If you do that, though, it's very hard to get the timing just right, because you gotta get lucky and be able to stick this in the exact right spot to pull that off. But I did actually do that once, and it worked. But it's also on an engine that was worth sacrificing to fix versus actually doing it right, because it was a cheap piece of crap. If you're gonna do this kind of thing onto anything that you want to like use and have it reliable, get the Japanese parts from either Honda or Yamaha. Like Yamaha's old Mitsubishi CDIs are very good, and I've actually yet to see one of those that doesn't work. A lot of the older Honda ones, if you get anything before 1986, they tend to not be so reliable. And actually, any Honda stators before 1986, they tend to be pretty shitty too. I know a lot of people out there are probably screaming saying Honda's like the most reliable shit ever. Well, you never fucked with their electronics when it's gone bad. But around after 86, it seems they got their shit together and they work a lot better. These boxes, both the AC and the DC ones, are actually copies of Honda's stuff, and they still use them today in a lot of their shit. Like pit bikes all use these. All the Chinese ATVs and dirt bikes and all that crap, they all use these things. And the quality's really hit and miss. But the general idea is if they last longer than a month, then they're good. The reason why some of them die within that first short period of time is electronics, like semiconductors, need a burn-in period, and the Chinese simply are too cheap to do this. Basically what that means is when you make any sort of IC, which is basically any of these black things, these little computer chip things, they actually got tons of little metal traces in there, and there's little wafers of silicone and germanium, and you got like a whole little circuit board inside of those fuckers. And when you make one, during the first period of putting power through it, like some of those traces and stuff are going to be generating heat, and if they make it through that first period of running power through them without burning out, then they're good. Like any quality electronics company, they're going to hook up their electronics to power and they're going to run it up to temperature before selling it, because then they know it's good. Chinese don't fucking do that. So you basically, if the circuit is not good, it's going to blow during the burn-in period while you're using it, instead of during the burn-in period in the factory like they should do it. But the flip side of that is, if they did actually do all that quality control, because it takes time, it takes equipment, this shit would cost a lot more money, and I'd rather just buy two of them and know that one of them is going to work. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier is, if you run a DC CDI, especially if you do it on something with electric start, you need to put a flyback diode in there, because a starter solenoid, or anything that's inductive, like an electric motor, a relay, a solenoid, when you put power through them to when you put power through a coil, then you're building up energy inside that coil, and when you turn that power off, like say when you click a solenoid and then when you release your key in your ignition, there's a reverse voltage spike from that solenoid, diode, or relay, and if you have a DC CDI and you don't put a flyback diode on it, you get a transient spike and it will blow your CDI. I didn't know what that was when I first started doing this, and I was so fucking brilliant as to put a DC CDI in a fucking boat, and then we took that boat out onto the lake, and the guy driving the boat went to turn the boat off, turned the key the wrong way, and hit the starter while the engine was running, and that voltage spike blew our fucking CDI while I had a spare sitting on the beach in my backpack. So that was fun. I also, when I do use the Chinese, not Japanese CDI units, I always buy more than one. And if you're, like, this is my test box, it doesn't have a proper plug on it anymore, but I'll get the plug and I'll tape the spare CDI to the frame, or if it's a boat, I'll put it in the doghouse, usually in that the starter rope box. Like if you take the hood off a boat motor, there'll be a little pouch with a rope in it you can wrap around the flywheel if you fucked your starter or something. And I'll put the extra CDI in there or something. Like, it's so much cheaper than the higher quality Japanese parts that you can buy two, and I've never actually had two of them with me and had the first one blow. But that's just the way it works. When I fill my tool bag and go fucking dirt biking or something, if I brought every tool I need to fix almost anything, nothing will break. If I left a spark plug wrench back at home on my desk, guaranteed I'm going to need to pull the fucking spark plug. Yeah, and that's just the way life goes sometimes. Anyways, thank you, and good luck with your ignition systems.